Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
I was having a smoke break when the new employee, Jeb something or other, tottered out the back door and plopped himself down next to me at the picnic table. New was not something I thought of when I saw him, not by any stretch of the imagination. He was a crusty old geezer, and I watched with mild wonder as he rolled himself a cigarette from a tattered yellow pouch of top rolling tobacco. His arthritic, gnarled hands worked smoothly with practiced familiarity. Too bad they didn't work that well on the assembly line, I thought. It was only Jeb's second day, and I figured he'd be lucky to make the week. In fact, I was hoping he realized sooner rather than later this was not the job for him. Sad, yet all too common. Poor old buggers with little or no retirement, quickly finding their Social Security wasn't going to cut it. I always wondered, why in the hell did they think they could work in a factory? I had no doubt back in the day most of them could throw down with the best. Now they were just crippled up, tired, and broke. I was still young, but smart enough to understand that more than likely my turn was coming too someday. A harsh reality that didn't help any when I was the one deciding their working fate. We were in the highly competitive tool industry, building and packaging up toolkits for Craftsman, DeWalt, and Makita, just to name a few. We couldn't afford any mistakes or delays, and I couldn't afford letting myself get chummy with any of the workers I supervised. As floor lead, I tried my damnedest not to get personally involved, and I was plenty irritated someone had cut him loose for break, knowing I was already out here. Being alone and smoking together almost always led to trouble. Hell, short of cracking a beer with them, this was as close to intimate social interaction as one could get. Two working men on a fine spring day, sitting on a bench and having a smoke. I should have stamped mine out and headed back inside, but I didn't. Hell, I just lit the damn thing. Jeb struck a match and pink sulfur exploded as the head flashed briefly before sputtering out. "Damn cheap gas station matches," he muttered, then looked at me from behind spectacled eyes. "Got a light?" Son of a, I thought as I flipped my lighter in his direction. He lit his rollie, and I braced myself for the inevitable small talk sure to follow as he handed my lighter back. Making me reach for it, Jeb held on a second or two, studying my hand before letting go. A wiry grin warped the corners of his grizzled mouth as he raised his gaze to look me in the eye. "Do a lot of fishing, do ya?" he asked. The comment took me by surprise, so I inhaled a drag before answering back through a cloud of smoke. "How you figure?" His dry lips cracked open in a mostly toothless grin. When he chuckled, I swear I saw a twinkle in his eyes. And damn it, there it was, the first little seed of attachment. What he said next nurtured it to near growth. "Your finger." His voice was raspy from years of smoking. "The way it's all sliced up. You been pulling hooks out of some mighty toothy fish, ain't ya? You catching fish like that, you ought to be using a pair of needle-nose pliers or get yourself one of them fancy hook removers." I was flabbergasted and couldn't help but respond. After all, we were suddenly talking about fishing, and this old guy had clearly done his share. "Well," I heard myself say, "I'm a crick fisher or mountain lakes, real bushwhacker stuff, getting into places most people won't try. I've always had real good luck, lots of quantity anyways, little brookies mostly, a cutthroat or a rainbow every once in a while. Not much more than pan size, though." I paused, waiting for the inevitable, "Them's the best eatin'," response. When it didn't come, I asked myself, how far do I really want to take this conversation? After all, there were a couple of things going on here. First, most likely a few days from now, if not tonight, I'd be in the manager's office as we placed a call to the staffing agency, requesting that Jeb not report to work on his next scheduled day. Second, I'd found the ultimate honey hole. There was a damn good reason my finger was chewed and ragged. I'd been catching brook trout 15 inches and up. I didn't even know they got that big. When they did, they had hooked snouts and a mouthful of pointy, razor-sharp teeth. Teeth that quickly sliced and diced my fingers as I pulled barbed hooks from their mouths. I wondered, if I shared the rest of the story, would old Jeb break the cardinal rule and ask where I was catching them? It's not like the hobbled-up bastard could get there, but he could tell others. Loose lips sink ships and always ruin a good fishing hole. I warily eyed him through our smoky haze. He looked like the world's oldest kid, asking to open gifts on Christmas morning. He was that damned excited. So, against my better judgment, I went ahead and let loose about the monster brookies I'd caught over the weekend, obviously leaving out any and all critical details that might give the tiniest hint whatsoever as to where this miraculous phenomenon was occurring. To Jeb's credit, he didn't ask. By this time we'd finished our smokes and overdone our allotted break time by at least a minute or two. When we got back to work, however, Jeb did a little better. That evening I recommended we keep him on at least until the end of the pay period, knowing the old fart was probably too tough to quit on his own, knowing I was letting my emotions override my judgment. Jeb showed up Sunday for his second week, and I lost a bit of respect from my team. He was only doing marginally better. We were able to make up for him, but not without a good deal of stress and extra workload. And don't think it had gone unnoticed that I was taking my lunch breaks with him. The only thing keeping the peace was Jeb's dogged determination. He was an absolute workhorse, trying his damnedest every day. Yet by Wednesday of week 2, it was obvious to all this wasn't going to happen. Me and Jeb sat in the break room that last day of May 1995. Our 12-hour shifts meant today was Friday. Jeb poured himself a shaky cup of coffee before opening his metal lunch pail. It was the same color green and had about as many scrapes and dents as his thermos. His lunch consisted of a PB&J sandwich, a small bag of undoubtedly generic potato chips, and a few dry, ragged strips of venison jerky. He'd made the jerky himself out of the deer he'd shot that fall. It was terrible, but I always took a piece when offered and pretended it was great, wondering how he chewed it with only 3 or 4 teeth. I guess he just gummed it to death. Jeb wasn't looking so good. He was pale and his hand tremors were bad enough he'd spilled his coffee when he poured it. I watched intently as he eyed the meager contents of his lunch bucket, then slammed it shut. I ain't hungry. How about you and me going out back and having a smoke? Bring your own lunch if you want, but I feel like there's something I need to tell you. Well, I wasn't very hungry either. I'd been bracing myself all day for the lunch talk I was about to have with him, feeling I owed him more than just a cold call from the staffing agency. Maybe he was quitting on his own, saving me from the painful speech I'd been rehearsing all morning long. Somehow, though, I didn't think so. Something else was bothering the man, something fierce from the looks of him. We sat down at the picnic table, spring storm clouds blowing across the gray sky, threatening to dump rain on our somber parade. I pulled a Marlboro Red from my pack as Jeb dipped a couple of fingers and a thumb into his pouch of top, situating the shaggy brown clump of strands into the crease of thin white paper, then expertly rolling a perfectly cylindrical tube of nicotine-laced bliss. The same arthritic fingers that fumbled and dropped tools on the never-ending flow of an assembly line were the same fingers that could still roll a smoke, squeeze the trigger of a rifle, and tie on a hook. Ironic how they betrayed him what he needed the most right now, other than a smoke anyways. Jeb had been a mechanic as a kid in his dad's heavy equipment shop, then an army demolition man, an electrician, and a logging truck driver, a hunter and a fisher, a lifelong bachelor without children. It's amazing what you can learn about a man, 10 minutes to half hour at a time in just a few short days. It might help to know I am an only child who never knew my dad. He was killed in a logging accident shortly after I was born. Mom did everything she could to provide for me, but she stayed single, so I never had a dad, step or otherwise. As a youngin', I didn't exactly aspire to greatness, yet I did okay. For the most part, I stayed out of trouble and passed high school before getting on at the local tool factory, the best I was expected to do. Still, I did a bit better, making shift lead before I was old enough to legally drink. So, as corny as it sounds, old Jeb, the toothless old man who listened to my stories before sharing his own, well, he was the closest thing to a father I'd ever had. We lit up our cancer sticks, and for a while I didn't think Jeb was going to say anything at all. Then he looked, not at me, but into me, the terrifying gaze of a man who needed to get something heavy off his chest. I should have thrown my cig into the coffee can full of butts and ran inside. I should have, but I didn't. Hell, I just lit the damn thing. What I'm about to tell you, son, I've never told another living soul. Hell, they'd lock me up in the loony bin if I did. He chuckled, a phlegm-choked spasm without humor. I found myself gripped in the paralysis of fear and something else. Was it longing? Suddenly I needed to know what he was about to say, even though within the deepest part of my being, I knew what he was about to tell me was going to keep me awake tonight, perhaps for many nights to come. I nervously drew in a drag as Jeb began his tale. It was the spring of '65 when I moved to Montana. After 8 years of blowing shit up for the Army Corps of Engineers and another 8 as an electrician in Kansas, I decided to head for the mountains. Go west, young man, and all that jazz. He paused to relight his smoke, and I quickly did the math, ticking off years with my fingers. Jeb noticed and gruffed. That's right. Puts me on the high side of 60, don't it? The number I'd come up with was 71, but I didn't bother interrupting him. I wanted to hear this. I had my military credentials and a little experience working on diesel motors, so I got a job fairly quick, hauling logs for a local guy named Jake. He had a few trucks, and I had more than a few bills, so I figured, what the hell, I'll lay my head down on the chopping block. I tell you what, Jason, it was a hell of a job. I was given the basics about bunks, reach, pivot, and load, chaining up and whatnot. Then I was cut loose to follow the main man. Luther was his name. He was pushing 60 and still hell on wheels. A local logging truck legend. Tall, lanky, all sinew and bone. He was an asshole. Though we did have one thing in common, other than driving truck. Our love of fishing. I think that's the only reason he tolerated me. I struggled keeping up for the first couple of weeks, every day getting the ever-loving dog piss scared out of me, navigating them shitty mountain roads with all of their hairpin curves. The rest of the day was boredom, highway miles between mill towns. We dropped logs all over northwest Montana, even out of state in Idaho once in a while. I made it through till fall, feeling pretty confident. I'd had a few hiccups, but nothing major. Then we got our first snow. Not a lot, but enough to intimidate the hell out of me. So I pulled into a turnout and dragged out my chains. About that time Luther rumbled up, rolling his window down and giving me a look of pure disgust. You gotta be kidding me, boy. This ain't no chain-up weather. He shook his head and flicked his cigarette butt at me. You better hurry the hell up. Soon's I'm loaded, I'm heading down. I ain't waiting for your candy ass. I felt like a scolded dog, but didn't let it stop me from chaining up. I made it to the top just in time, barely getting out of the way as Luther blew by, blaring his horn and flipping me the bird as he barreled down the mountain. I got loaded and secured my logs in record time before starting down with my own stack of timber, pushing my skills to the limit as I bounced around, hanging on for dear life. A steep incline on my left and a sheer drop-off out my passenger side window. I rounded a corner and saw Luther's tire tracks. They had gone as far right as possible without going over, before shooting left, crashing into the hillside and pinballing his rig back across the road. And there was Luther, standing in a daze on the shoulder looking down, and damned if he wasn't smoking. I tell you what, Jason, as I ground to a stop, I got an image in my head plain as day. Luther behind the wheel, struggling to keep control of 70,000 pounds of I don't give a shit about you pushing him around. Lit cigarette clamp between stained teeth, grabbing his smokes and leaping from his cab as it dove over the cliff. I got out and hollered, "Luther! Hey, Luther!" He slowly turned his head, finally realizing I was there. "Maybe you should have chained up." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop 'em. He froze, eyeing me from the corners of squinted eyes, and I thought, oh hell, he's gonna beat the shit out of me. Instead, he tossed his butt over the abyss as he threw back his head and laughed. It was the pure, free laugh of a man who knew he'd just cheated death. Luther crawled into my cab, dirty, bruised, and bloody, but no broken bones and nothing bleeding enough to cause alarm. It was a quiet ride down the mountain and back into town. We were getting unloaded at Plum Creek when I finally breached the subject of reporting the accident. Luther grinned, a weird little grin making me more than uneasy. "You know, Jeb, how about we call it a day and head for the bar before Jake gets wind of this? Drinks are on me." I was about to protest when he looked at me, something different in his eyes. I can't explain it, but a chill ran through me as if someone was walking over my grave. "I think it's time, Jeb. I feel like there's something I need to tell you." As the storm clouds grudgingly released their first bit of rain, I halted mid-drag, my mind putting puzzle pieces together, the connection I'd been waiting for. "I feel like there's something I need to tell you." The words resonated within my brain, great big waves of reverberating vibrations transcending through decades of time. A special secret reaching out to me, a simple working-class man. Heavy liquid drops spattered on the asphalt as Jeb looked at me and nodded in understanding. This was a secret between men. The gravity-laden moment hung between us as he rolled another smoke. Then, and I hate myself for it, I checked my watch. I couldn't help it. My years of working days were split neatly into segments: production, breaks, and lunch, and nothing short of death or dismemberment trumped production. Yet this did, and I'd betrayed Jeb in my moment of weakness, like work was more important than what he was sharing with me. He simply smiled that damned knowing smile, lighting up his smoke and saying, "Yeah, I guess I don't have much time left, do I? I'll try and hurry it up." So me and Luther sat in the corner of Moose's saloon. He gulped down a couple of shots of whiskey before cracking open a PBR and telling me about his secret fishing hole, the spot I'm going to tell you about now. The rain began in earnest, pounding down on the tin overhang of our small smoking sanctuary as I choked on my drag. A fishing hole? You gotta be kidding. This is what he needed to tell me? And I'd taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker, like some big old dumb fish. Jeb eyed me as his words started off cold and harsh, before fading back into a more reverent tone. "Listen here, Jason. It ain't just a fishing hole. It's heaven on earth. At least, someplace right next door to Earth. You can get there from here, and you don't have to die." The venom of his words stung, but the sting was quickly replaced with concern. His sudden crazy rambling, his increasingly gray pallor. Oh lordy, I thought, he's having an episode. "Listen, Jeb, maybe we should run you to the hospital. You ain't looking so good, and you ain't making sense." "No!" He slammed a fist on the picnic table, rattling the can of butts and practically knocking the cherry off his rollie. "I have to tell you this. Just shut up and listen." Well, I tell you, sometimes things happen outside of us and out of our control. Even though you know the right thing to do, you don't do it. It doesn't make sense, but they are the moments you relive over and over again as time passes by. Jeb interrupted my wandering thoughts. "You have to get back to work, Jason. I'm going home after this. We both know this ain't the job for me. I'll make do until something else comes along. Hell, I hear Walmart needs a greeter." He gave a genuine laugh, and I couldn't help but laugh too. The picture of crusty old Jeb, sitting by the big sliding glass doors, welcoming the public masses to Waltard. We both knew that was never going to happen. Yet it made me feel better. He was talking about a future in which he was alive. "If I had more time, son, I'd tell you about Clarence, the man who told Luther about the fishing hole clear back in '35. He told Luther, but someone else had told Clarence. The story is generational, getting passed down to working-class men with a love of fishing and the outdoors. It truly is paradise, a place of unimaginable beauty. You're about to be blessed and cursed, for it will consume you if you let it, and we all do. We don't choose it, it chooses us. I'm almost sorry to pass this on to you, but it's such a beautiful burden. I hope you thank me for it someday before passing it along yourself." Lightning flashed, and I was transfixed with awe. Jeb was a mystical prophet spouting nonsense I somehow understood on a different level. An almost incomprehensible dread began rising within me as thunder crashed and Jeb went on. "There is a price to pay, so think about this before searching it out. Like all of us before, you'll never get married or have children, for fear of losing your freedom or having to pass the knowledge on to one of your own. You won't have any friends either. You'll be jealous of your secret place, and it'll be jealous of you. Your ambition will wane away, and you'll be content staying where you're at right now. But I guarantee you'll be happy. You're gonna catch the biggest fish, shoot the biggest animals, and harvest the biggest berries. No matter what is plaguing you in life, you'll be happy, despite the loneliness." The storm began to rage, my brain on the verge of overload. Still, Jeb wasn't done. I should have realized how bad the situation was, but I didn't. Jeb's frantic warning penetrated my near delirium as he shouted over the growing maelstrom. "Jason, listen to me. There's just one rule. Don't ever stay after dark." My terrified gaze rolled in his direction. A greasy sheen of sweat glossed over his pale gray pallor. Lightning flashed again as he dropped his smoke, hunching over in a strange, contorted manner. Shit, heart attack. My own smoke slipped from my fingers as I rushed to his side. "Jeb! Jeb!" His head smacked onto the table with a dull thud, face contorting beyond recognition as he grunted through spasms of pain. "My locker, Jason. I left you everything you need. The secret's yours now. I can't help any more." His body spasmed, jaw falling slack and spilling out his ash-colored tongue. His eyes remained open but fogged over, and I knew he could see no more. His sudden death tore me from one insanity and into another. I lunged for the back door, throwing it open, hollering into the factory depths. My pleas for help echoed vainly within a silent darkness. After the storm passed and the power was restored, the ambulance came and went, leaving slowly without emergency sirens or flashers. What was the point? Jeb was absolutely, without a doubt, rigor mortis had set in, dead. After it all settled down, I sat in the company conference room with the police chief and a handful of company higher-ups. I was given water and a cup of coffee before being politely grilled for a half hour or so. I honestly can't remember what I told them, but I damn sure know what I didn't. In the end, they went away, patting me on the back, assuring me it wasn't my fault. They gave me some counseling options and at least the next week off. Before leaving, I slipped into the break room and opened Jeb's locker. Only a faded denim coat hung from the metal hook bolted within. I should have said to hell with it, but I didn't. Hell, I just opened the damn thing. Despite everything, or maybe because of it, I almost began laughing. Not the best reaction. If I started, I might not be able to stop. They'd find me next break, cackling like a madman before they called the men in white suits to come take me away. My counseling would be a straitjacket in a rubber room. I grabbed the coat and beat-footed out of there. Jeb's thermos and lunch bucket sat forgotten on the break room table, a fitting memorial to a working-class man. Not even a cold beer and a smoke could calm my frayed nerves as I slumped at my kitchen table. Jeb's coat hung from the chair beside me, gray and dead, without purpose, like his body down at the county morgue. It took me 3 beers and twice as many cigarettes before I checked the pockets. One was empty. In the other, I found a couple of folded-up pieces of paper. The first was a map, crude yet detailed. Jeb's shaky scrawl labeled highways and side roads, mountains, hills, creeks, and lakes. In the top corner was a plus sign with the beginning letters of all 4 directions. In the bottom corner was a horizontal line along with a notation, 1 inch equals 1 mile. In the middle of the whole mess was an X over a small lake Jeb had failed to identify. My heart pounded and I shook my head in amazement. Other than the X, I didn't need the rest. I was completely familiar with all of the surroundings. My own honey hole was right in the vicinity. Words mere hours ago echoed back to me. We don't choose it. It chooses us. My hands trembled as I unfolded the second page. A letter from Jeb. Dear Jason, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Ha ha. I always wanted to say that. Funny, but it seems we all die shortly after passing on the secret. Luther died a few days after telling me. He was drunk and never made it home. Not sure how I'm gonna go, but I'm thinking heart attack. I left you a map and suspect you're already close. I knew the minute you told me about them big brook trout. You only need to search a little farther and, as they say, X marks the spot. Look for the giant bull pine. Its archway will be your entrance. It wasn't there for you before, but it'll be there now. It needs you to find it. Love, Jeb. Tears welled up within my eyes, and I wiped them away as I read the last lines. P.S. Get yourself a bigger pole. You're gonna need it. And remember, don't ever stay after dark. My whole day crashed upon me as I sobbed inconsolably. For Luther, for Jeb, for myself and the fear of the unknown. When I finally stumbled to bed, my dreams were interrupted by horrendous, nightmarish things I couldn't quite remember when I woke up. Jeb was there, smoke billowing from his mouth as he shouted, It's paradise, Jason! His next breath, Don't ever stay after dark! He died over and over again. The dull thud of his forehead striking wood, his grotesque rolling face as it flopped over to stare at me, gray lolling tongue almost touching the filthy ash-covered wood. I shouted back, Don't lick the table! Before waking in a cold, drenched sweat. The sun was rising when I gave up on sleep and headed out the door. Putting some Johnny Cash in the tape deck, I drove west out of town, not bothering to consult Jeb's map. I didn't need to. I parked in a familiar clearing of piss fir and tamaracks. Getting out, I donned my backpack and .357 revolver. A few survival essentials, but no fishing gear. Today was a scouting trip. Lighting up a smoke, I studied Jeb's map, wondering what kind of fool's errand was I on. Things like this were fiction and fairy tales. Things like this didn't happen in the real world. I should have left, but I didn't. Hell, I'd just got here. By my best estimation, I was barely 2 inches south of the promised land. The entrance had to be here somewhere. After bushwhacking my way through the underbrush for over an hour, I was scraped up and bleeding. My seeping blood drew mosquitoes in droves, and I'd just about had enough. Then I saw it, a bullpine the size of a redwood, the monstrosity of a tree split into a Y about 10 feet up, the Siamese twin offshoot creating an immense wooden rainbow, framing the beginning of a trail, a beckoning, unknown path I couldn't resist. I hesitated, ever so briefly, before stepping through the threshold. I immediately felt lightheaded and short of breath, doubling over with elbows on my knees, trying to suck in the practically non-existent oxygen. My fingers and toes tingled. Then the feelings were gone, my body adjusting in mere seconds. I felt wonderful, better than I'd had in years, rejuvenated and breathing like I'd never smoked a day in my life. A profound sense of joy began building inside of me, firing off the pleasure receptors within my brain. The rest of the hike was a psychedelic blur as the trail opened before me. I was royalty, red carpet laid out, a bride with petals strewn before her feet. Each path to the promised land is different and unique. You are one of the chosen few. The philosophical thought breezed a lullaby through my mind. The trees danced gently with no hint of wind. Flowers shot from the ground, growing and blooming into an array of exploding colors. Their large, soft petals caressed the exposed skin of my arms and face as I glided between them, sending waves of pleasure through the nerves of my body. Great fuzzy yellow and black-striped bumblebees, along with red-throated hummingbirds the size of pigeons, flitted about. The vibrations of their wings played a masterful melody, worthy of Mozart, Bach, and Rachmaninoff. Squirrels chattered as birds chirped, the sounds blending into the rushing waters of a nearby creek, adding a choir to the beautiful symphony. My Lord, I thought, this is where it all comes from. Artists, poets, composers, writers, and musicians, they all tapped into places such as this, channeling it to the rest of us, the working class who help make the world go round in our own, often ignored professions. I would never be one of the gifted elite, but I had something they would never have. Real-world access to the dreamland from whence it all flowed. Me, a simple, working-class man. The trail ended as I stepped into a clearing. A large body of water sat like an immense ink blot spilled in the middle of lush green grass, birch, and weeping willow trees. The lake was a deep turquoise blue, not a single ripple upsetting the calm waters. Then a whopper of a fish broke the glass, rolling over as the sun reflected off the many iridescent colors of its scales before it disappeared back into the depths. A few white-tailed does, bigger than I'd ever seen, raised their heads to look at me, ears flicking with disinterest before their heads bowed to the ground once more. Wild raspberry bushes dotted the landscape. Red, multi-segmented berries the size of small apples hung low from the vines. The fruit and trees, the flowers, animals, and insects, everywhere I looked and all I saw was supersized. If only I were 10 feet tall, things may have been to proper scale. For the second time in less than 24 hours, my brain was on the verge of sensory overload. Though I longed to explore more, it was simply too much to bear. I had found it, Jeb's paradise. It was enough for now. To tread farther into this wonderland would be to risk insanity, as glorious as it would be. In the following months, I explored the lake and all of its bays, the unseen nooks and crannies of this fairy tale land. I bathed in the pools of the creek, gorged myself on an extraordinary offering of fruit, and even shot a grouse or two, roasting them on the rotating spit I'd cobbled together over my campfire pit. Taking Jeb's advice, I bought a bigger pole, and good thing I did. The fish were huge and of a variety unknown to me, though they did resemble brook, brown, rainbow, and cutthroat trout, as well as pike, bass, and perch. They tasted phenomenal, but I had to eat them within a few days, finding they spoiled rapidly when removed from their world, as did the fruit and birds. I wondered if this was why Jeb's jerky tasted so bad, marvelous and preserved for a while, but suffering from our world's decay quicker than it could be consumed. Work was going all right. I performed my function as shift lead, yet often found myself dreaming of my days off. My job was simply a matter of necessity. I needed to survive, to eat and pay my bills, and that was fine by me. It was the middle of September when the manager called me to his office. We might have been friends at this point, but I didn't need that. Paradise gave me everything I needed. Damned if I would let something as base and fickle as friendship get in the way. He wanted to know how I was doing, saying I'd changed since the incident, vaguely referring to Jeb dropping dead in front of me. I asked if I was performing up to my job expectations. When he replied yes, I smiled and said, "It's all good. May I be excused? I have to give breaks." I left him shaking his fat head. Why couldn't he see that I was happy? It was a crisp fall Montana morning as I left my house bound for Paradise. The temp in heaven never changed much, so I didn't bother packing a jacket or any such warmth-giving nonsense. By mid-afternoon, I settled down on the lake's edge. I'd bagged a rabbit the size of a poodle and used my spit to cook it over the open flames. My belly full, I smoked and sipped on an overly hot cup of coffee, watching the clouds change shapes as they rolled across the sun. The sun was different here, smaller or farther away. Regardless, it acted the same as in our mundane world. rising in the east and setting in the west, completing its cycle from dawn till dusk. The theatrics of the clouds convorting in the sky mesmerized me, and I nodded off. When I snapped awake, the orange orb of light hung low in the western sky. I should have packed it in and called it a day, but I didn't. Hell, I hadn't even gone fishing yet. I had time for a cast or two, maybe even 3 or 4. For extra luck, I tied on the lure Jeb had given me the day before he'd told me about the fishing hole. "I ain't gonna need it no more," he'd grunted, throwing it on the picnic table. It was old, handmade, and extraordinary, expertly carved and painted to look like a brook trout. 4 shiny new treble hooks dangled from its colorful, striped and speckled body. Jeb had made it himself many years ago, before his fingers and knuckles were ruined from arthritis. "Hell, Jeb," I'd said. "I can't accept this. It's beautiful. There's got to be somebody else who deserves this more than me." "I told you, I ain't got nobody." It was such a touching gesture. I took it out of honor and respect, wondering where the hell I was ever going to use the damn thing. Now I knew. As I casted it out into the emerald depths, Jeb's ever-present warning floated to the back of my mind. On my 5th or 6th cast, something bigger than anything I'd ever caught grabbed Jeb's lure. I jerked my line tight, securing my prize and foolishly hollering, "Fish on!" I kept the tip of my pole skyward, refusing to let the fish dive for the safety of whatever shelter lay underneath the depths. It was an epic battle, and as we fought, the sun sank lower in the sky. Just when I thought the fight was over, I caught the first glimpse of my adversary and made a critical mistake, pausing in awe of the sheer size and beauty of the fish. Then it was gone, leaving Jeb's lure hanging on the root of a stump, mocking me in plain sight, 10 feet offshore and half that below the water. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, I spent the next few minutes trying to free my lure, desperately whipping my pole up and down, hoping it would break loose. My only option soon became apparent. Swim out and get the damn thing. I'd swam for many lures before, and this was as easy as it got. However, Jeb's warning leaped once more to the forefront of my mind. "Don't ever stay after dark." I should have listened, but I didn't. Hell, what if it was gone tomorrow? Figuring I had just enough time, I stripped down to my tighty-whities and dove into the frigid water. When I reached the stump, I placed my hands on its jagged top. My head bobbed above the surface. The shallow water dropped sharply off into the deep beyond my rooted rest, and suddenly I was terrified. I couldn't bring myself to duck under. Instead, I put my feet down, finding the slimy footing of roots under 6 inches of sand and mud. Reaching down with one arm, I strained my neck skyward until only my eyes, nose, and mouth remained exposed. My hand frantically scrambled about in search of Jeb's lure. When I finally felt my fingers grasp it, I struggled to free the barbs sunk into the soft, waterlogged wood. Triumph as the lure came free. Fear as my foot slipped into a tangled knot of roots. No big deal, I tried to tell myself. If it slipped in, it can slip out. After several seconds of maneuvering that felt like an eternity, I began to panic. In this moment, I thought I learned what fear was. What I saw next taught me more than I needed to know. Ripples in the water, a strange, misshapen shadow gliding beneath the surface. More ripples, extending from the hulking mass, heading directly towards me. A thick, slick black snake with teeth-lined suction cups rose above me, before plunging out of sight below its wake. I groaned softly, the only sound I could muster, as I felt the thing wrap around the calf of my trapped leg. My bladder gave up its warm, salty contents. My bowels loosed, then blinding, earth-shattering pain. I started to howl, then numbness, as if my whole body had been shot full of Novocaine. I floated in the water, unaware of the passage of time, knowing only that full darkness had settled in. Don't ever stay after dark. I was never much of a rule breaker, yet here I was. Though I couldn't see the beast, I knew it was out there, its leeching tentacles sucking the lifeblood from my body. So this is what it feels like to bleed out? Staring up into the night sky, I couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of this world. Was I the only one to ever see this? The stars were out en masse, not just white and yellow pinpricks of light, but colored hues of orange, blue, green, red, and purple. Christmas in the sky. The sun in this world always seemed so small and far away. In contrast, the bright full moon loomed impossibly close. I could see craters and snow-capped mountains, like the time I had looked at Mars through the high-powered lens of a telescope. I reached up, vainly hoping to caress the shining polar white circle as I graciously accepted my fate. For I had seen things no mortal man had seen, me, a simple, working-class man. As I gave up on life, chanting began from the north. I lazily tore my eyes away from the splendor of the moon and saw torchlight flickering through the trees. The chanting grew louder as the torches left the tree line, moving towards Lake's edge. Whatever numbing toxin the Leviathan had injected into me was also a hell of a drug. Great big red-haired giants were the torchbearers, their massive figures crystal clear in the fiery illuminated darkness. In the middle of a dozen or more were two standing at least 11 feet tall, their ropes secured to the massive antlers of a large bull elk. The magnificent animal jerked his head as he strained against the constraints. The giants braced themselves as they continued dragging him to an elm growing from the bank. The haunting, archaic chant continued, low and deep, as they secured the elk's head to the tree's base. His body flopped to the ground, his neck stretched over the water. A giant taller than all the rest stepped forward. He wore animal skins draped around his waist, and a large plume of peacock feathers adorned his gigantic head. He approached the elk as he pulled a bone machete from a leather sheath, before throwing his arms wide, exposing his red hairy chest and bearded face to the heavens. The chanting fell silent, as his words alone echoed into the lit expanse of sky, an ancient, alien cry to the god of the lake. I felt the grip on my leg loosen, along with a flicker of hope. The giant chieftain knelt and the elk stilled. With one precise motion, the majestic bull's throat was slit. Blood spurted, a sickening spray raining down upon the water. The mutant tentacle released me, and I watched in relief as the lake god headed for sacrificial blood. Maybe it was luck, or fate, or the relaxed state I was in. Whatever the case, my foot slipped from its knotted trap. I was free, but not really. God only knew what would happen if the giants saw me. Clutching Jeb's lure, I ducked beneath the water and swam for all get-out toward shore. I hauled myself onto dry land. The numbing agent was wearing off. Once more pain racked my body as I army crawled into the bushes, wet, freezing, and exhausted. Despite my dire circumstances, I dared a look through the mishmash of overlapping branches and leaves, a moviegoer peeking through the cracked fingers of my hand-covered face. I shouldn't have, but I did. The allure of the horrific ceremony, a temptation not to be denied. I wish to God I hadn't. The elk sacrifice was only the beginning, a creature large enough to shed the quantities of blood needed to garner the attention of their god. A second wave of giants emerged, wrangling a group of naked pygmies, dark-skinned men, children, and women, some clutching babies to their breasts. I wanted to scream, to sprint helter-skelter into the melee and stop the inhumanity, but I couldn't. I could only watch as the giants herded them like lambs to the slaughter, pushing and throwing them into the lake as they begged and cried for mercy. Water boiled. A round tangle of maroon flesh rose up, its multitude of tentacles rising and reaching out, snatching victims from water and air, before greedily shoving them flailing and alive into its gaping, teeth-filled maw. The screams, the smacking, crunching sounds of flesh and bone being devoured nearly drove me to madness as I turned and sprinted blindly away. Somehow, I found the trail, before I collapsed, heaving on the ground, wanting nothing more than to cash in my chips, but I couldn't. Hell, I was practically home free. Grabbing up a large stick and using it for a cane, I lugged myself up and began limping down the path. The horrendous carnage faded into the distance as I hobbled along. I was hardly a stone's throw from the archway, when I began seeing shadow people darting back and forth. Horrible whispers seemed to emanate from my head. Then I realized they came from the beans, even as I began to make out their ghastly appearance. A Native American, a trapper, a Chinese railroad worker, a farmer, a cowboy, and a mechanic, plus many more. Their words reached me in a variety of languages, the taunts of ragged men, dressed in ragged apparel, rotting animal skins, filthy coveralls, torn jeans, dirty t-shirts, flannels, and hats, the working-class men, all still here after dark. I stood swaying on the trail, one nightmare behind, another gauntlet of horror before. I was fed up, tired, and pissed off. Surely they wouldn't eat their own. I stumbled, untouched between them, rounding the last corner as the specters slowly closed in behind me. The gateway appeared, my Chevy truck visible in the clearing beyond, a rusty beacon of hope. A lone figure stepped out, a cigarette dangling from his decaying mouth. Tall, lanky, all sinew and bones, a local logging truck legend. He was an asshole. Luther got in my face, blowing smoke, his breath foul enough to knock a maggot off a shitwagon. "You don't belong here," he hissed. "Your generation is too soft. You're not man enough to deserve this." Another figure emerged from the brush next to the exit. "Jeb." I lunged forward, pushing Luther aside as I pleaded for intervention. Luther stuck out a foot and tripped me. What a dick, I thought as I piled into the dirt. Luther bore down as I rolled to my back, simultaneously swinging my walking stick with every bit of my remaining strength. It collided with the side of his head, causing way more damage than expected. His face split open in a wide, smiling gash. His jaw went sideways as teeth flew. An eyeball popped free of its socket as Luther staggered backward before falling to the ground, still clutching his burning cigarette. Shit! And he had called me soft. Struggling to my feet, I saw the others ambling towards me. Unrelenting zombies straight out of Night of the Living Dead. I wildly swung my stick, and when they paused, I turned, bolting for freedom, and ran smack into Jeb. I quickly realized this wasn't the kindly old man I'd adopted for a father. His stern face twisted into a sneer as he began screeching. "You broke the rule, you little bastard! Yeah, you're a bastard boy. Do you really think your dad was a logger? A real working-class man? Your mama lied to you. She screwed the mailman, the Orkin man, and the town drunk. She doesn't know who your daddy is. She's a whore. Mama's little whore boy." A cold, dead hand grasped my shoulder from behind. Painful, digging fingers began to turn me, and Jeb saw his lure. The bright moonlight glinting off the shiny barbed hooks I jammed into the elastic waistband of my soiled underwear before I had fled from the lake. "Jason?" Recognition dawned on him as a single tear ran down his cheek. "Jeb!" I cried as I was being pulled down. I reached out. "Jeb!" He grasped my hand and pulled with all his strength. "Jason!" he bellowed, pulling me past him and diving headlong into the midsection of my captor. Taloned fingers raked grooves in my skin as the thing flew violently into the others, spilling them like bowling pins along the trail. "Run, son!" Jeb screamed. He didn't have to tell me twice. I hauled ass for the exit. At the last second, my leg buckled, and I dug the end of my walking stick into the soil, using it to pole vault me through the arch and into freedom. Looking back, I saw Jeb beyond, his scrawny form throwing fists and elbows into a whirlwind of body parts. His head and shoulders appeared briefly, a drowning victim's head bobbing up one final time. He saw me and smiled, that damn knowing smile, and I swear I saw a twinkle in his eyes. Then he was gone, disappearing beneath the heap. I climbed into my truck and headed home. When I pulled onto the highway, my dash clock read 2:30 a.m. Great, the witching hour. The bars were closed and all the drunks would be on the road, which meant the cops would be out too. I prayed to God I didn't get pulled over. How in the hell could I explain my current state? Well, I made it home, and when I finally sat, bathed and bandaged in my easy chair, I cracked open a cold beer, lit a smoke, and vowed to never again return to paradise. However, as the weeks, then months passed by, it began to feel more and more like a bad dream. My wounds slowly faded to nothing. Not even scars remained, and with them went my memories, fragmented remnants of a nightmare not quite remembered. So that spring, I went back. For decades I went back. It was a drug not to be denied, an escape into paradise for a simple working-class man. But I never, ever again stayed after dark. That much remained with me all the rest of my years. I am, by working standards, an old man. Hell, I guess I'm old by any standard you can think of. I still get up every morning for work, though I can't do much. They only keep me around because they feel sorry for me. My coworkers have taken to calling me CJ behind my back, like I don't know. Poor old crazy Jason, crippled up, tired, and nuttier than a squirrel turd. It's almost impossible to get out of bed when the alarm goes off, and I know my time is short. I know because the other day I couldn't make it to paradise. Yet I still made it to work at the beginning of the week. I had to, and when I got there, I knew why. There was a new hire, a fit young man just out of high school. He was, as we used to say, young, dumb, and full. Well, maybe you know the rest of the saying. He was drawn to me, and I was drawn to him. We don't choose it, it chooses us. He loved to hunt and hike, and most of all, he loved to fish. We went out back, and as I smoked, he vaped. We'd trade stories, and as I'm sure you've already figured out, there was something I needed to tell him. I just can't forget to warn him, don't ever stay after dark.